I heard Shri. I didn't. Are you still talking?
You can go ahead, send it in the chat. You can start.
Oh, I said I can start?
Mhm.
Okay. Welcome, greetings, everyone, to what is the third round in the third match of the third fixture in the JCSA debate competition 2025. My name is the Cardigan Nelson, and today I'll be serving as your host and chief adjudicator for this match. Joining me on panel are two eminently qualified panelists, Sonique Martin and Jason Williams. But before I even get into them, today we'll be seeing Clarendon College going up against Cornwall College on a motion that is pivotally important when you're talking about matters of civil service and work for people, especially those who are working within the civil service arena. But before I do any of that, it would be remiss of me to not mention our partnering institution today, the Jamaica Civil Service Association, who have sponsored this match and by extension, this competition that we're having. I'll invite my panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Sonique Martin, followed by Jason Williams. Sonique.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. I'm Sonique, and I will be one of your wing adjudicators for this match. De Cardiego had mentioned that the motion is a very interesting one and dealing with very relevant matters. And now I'll read the motion. The motion reads, this House as a trade union would prioritize ratifying and implementing C-190 over advocating for high wages. And that's the motion that will see another battle of the CC's content. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Williams. I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion today on the motion. And yes, I'm one of the wing adjudicators today.
Excellent. Thank you so much to my panelists. As Sonic rightfully mentioned, this is a motion that he's us talking about advocating for high wages versus something that some people might be unfamiliar with, the C-190, which we expect both teams to deliver very substantively on. So at the end of this match, we will know what the C-190 is and how reasonable is it also to expect advocating for higher wages, what that will look like. I'm comparing both of them to each other. But obviously that floor is or that battle is to be determined by both teams, both CCs, Clarendon College and Cornwall College. I'll just invite Clarendon College, who is proposing this motion, to introduce themselves, starting with the first speaker, and you'll continue successively in the order in which they'll speak. Clarendon College.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alia Mackenzie, first speaker of Team Proposition.
Good morning, everyone. I am Shahir Gonzalez, the second speaker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marlene Green, and I am first speaker.
Thank you so much, Clarendon College. And now the other CC in this match, Cornwall College, I invite them to unmute and to introduce themselves.
Good day, everybody. Repping CC today will be Tekwan Ellis, myself, as the first speaker, and then followed by me will be my second speaker, Demario Ferguson, and our third speaker will be Andrew Kamak.
All right, thank you so much, Cornwall College. You'll note that I was told that they're in separate rooms or in separate areas, so you will see them come on screen, the second and third speaker, as we progress throughout this match. Now, both teams would have already been informed as to the format of this debate, but for you, your sake, the viewing audience, I'll just explain what this match will look like. So we'll be utilizing the Jade Parliamentary debate format, which will see 3 speakers on each side, 3 in proposition, 3 in opposition. Now, the first speakers will be allotted 7 minutes within which to speak, followed by a 15-second grace period. And after the first proposition speaker and the first opposition speaker have both spoken for their respective 7 minutes, we'll enter an exciting period of cross-examination that elapses for 3 minutes. We'll see the proposition fielding 3 questions to their opposition team, 15 seconds to ask a question, 45 seconds to respond. Followed by that exciting period of cross-examination, we will see the opposition team fielding 3 questions to their proposition team, 15 seconds to ask the question, 45 seconds to respond. Followed by that, we'll have the second speakers, the second proposition speaker speaking for 6 minutes, followed by the opposition speaker speaking also for 6 minutes. And then we'll enter a second and final phase of cross-examination. Similar structure, 3 minutes for questions and answers, 15 seconds to ask, 45 seconds to respond. After which we'll enter a 1-minute grace period where both teams will be given the opportunity to tie up whatever points they had not discussed. And then after that 1-minute break, we will welcome the opposition speaker speaking first, in this instance for 5 minutes, finishing their teams and tying up all that needs to be said on behalf of your team, followed by the proposition speaker also speaking, third proposition speaker also speaking for 5 minutes, hereby concluding the round. Okay, great. Now, all that being said, speakers, please be reminded that you have, of your respective speaker times, POIs are accepted in either way you choose, though they may not be accepted. So you can either ask them verbally or you might indicate by raising your hand using the Zoom feature. That being said, though, Sanique will be keeping time and sending the time signals in the chat, so you can feel free to look in the chat for those. That being said, though, we welcome the first speaker on proposition to begin. You're here.
All protocols observed. I begin in 3, 2, 1. As Prime Minister of this House, I stand firmly affirming the motion. This House, as a trade union, would prioritize ratifying and implementing C-190 over advocating for high wages. A trade union is an organization of workers who protect and advocate for the common interest of workers, improve conditions of employment and working environments. Trade unions historically arose in the Caribbean to address challenges that workers face related to their jobs, especially vulnerable groups. This went beyond advocating for wages, but the protection of workers' safety, dignity, and rights. Considering the nature of trade unions, they have evolved not to address one particular thing, but the current urgent issues affecting workers of all sectors. To prioritize means to address things in order of importance, not completely excluding the other. And C-190 refers to the Violence and Harassment Convention Treaty. It is an international treaty that establishes the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence, harassment. The convention defines violence and harassment as a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices, threats that aim at, result in, or are likely to result in physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm. Currently, the working force is plagued by harassment. According to a shared incident data analysis in Jamaica, 49% of harassment occurs in the working environment. It not only affects formal workers with fixed employment wages, but workers in the informal economy who do not necessarily have fixed salaries. Jamaica has limited labor laws to address all the areas outlined in C-190, despite the need for improvements. The country's laws aligning with some of the aspects of C-190 rather, such as the Sexual Harassment Act. Considering the flaws in the system and persistent challenges of workers, though wages are important, it is not fair to limit the goal of trade unions to solely advocate for the economic interest of workers. To implement and ratify C-190, we will lobby for improved laws that address workers, especially laws that do not address non-sexual harassment, raise awareness in the informal as well as formal sectors through workshops, training, mass media, social media platforms to encourage workers to report, as well as implementing anonymous report channels and mechanisms to address victim shaming, implementing unannounced inspections to ensure employer compliance, as well as other observation measures in industries where applicable, and contracts to protect workers, mainly the informal workers, with formats available at trade unions that they can collect. In this debate, I will raise one argument. Ratifying and implementing C-190 produces long-term and structured outcomes for workers' interest. My second speaker will discuss the effects of harassment on workers and organizations and the impact of C-190 on human development. And my third speaker will summarize our stance and prove why we have won this debate. My first claim, ratifying and implementing C-190 produces long-term and structured outcomes for workers' interests. Ratifying and implementing C-190 creates a clear framework guiding the way harassment in the work environment is addressed. It encourages the government to strengthen their enforcement of their labor laws and implement laws that do not address all the areas of harassment outlined in C-190. Once those laws are implemented, they will likely be permanent, guaranteeing long-term protection of workers' rights. Uruguay, for instance, who amended its labor laws to provide explicit definitions of workplace violence and harassment. These amendments establish clear mechanisms for workers to submit complaints, thereby offering robust protection and recourse of those affected by harassment. This exemplifies how ratification and implementation of C-190 can lead to tangible improvements in the legal landscape surrounding workplace harassment, ultimately guaranteeing sustainable protection for workers. My second warrant, to further warrant my substantive implementing C-190 will dismantle stigmas and fears about reporting workplace harassment. Many workers face harassment in their work environment, but due to fear of losing their jobs or income, they do not report. Not accepted. This is particularly true for individuals in the informal sectors, entry-level workers, and vulnerable cultural minorities. Furthermore, entering an environment where certain forms of harassment, threats, belittling, or intimidation are normalized discourages workers from reporting. According to a survey by the International Trade Union Confederation, C-190 implementations where unions raised awareness, negotiated workforce laws, among other things, dismantled the normalization of harassment and encouraged workers to advocate for themselves and report harassment. C-190 is also a prerequisite for future not accepted wage negotiations. For decades, unions have been advocating for higher wages for workers, however, they remain unacceptable. Throughout the years, wages may have been improved, but inflation and economic crises destroyed what was advocated for. The reason is simple. Some of the root causes of wage challenges are yet to be addressed. When the gender pay gap was significantly wide, advocating for higher wages was insufficient, but advocating against harassment and for equality was. This was proven with South Africa, who ratified C-190 in 2021, where unions made the connection between gender-based violence and harassment and unequal pay. After ratification, unions pushed for reforms which reduced the risk of women and other marginalized groups getting discriminatory wage cuts in times of economic shock. The impact if we don't prioritize C-190 is a workforce with unmotivated workers, broken rather by harassment, high turnover rates, more funds spent on physical and psychological health when harassment results in such, leaving less funds for economically satisfactory lives. High turnover rates and low productivity rates perpetuated by absenteeism as workers feel less comfortable going to work, leading to economic downturn. When we prioritize C-190, a comfortable, satisfactory workplace is achieved. Workers advocate for themselves and report harassment knowing they have a safety net backed by an international organization. This safety net reduces the fear of collective bargaining to advocate for future interests and even wage negotiations.
Right. We thank the first opposition speaker for that very fine speech. And now welcome the first proposition speaker from Cornwall College to counteract with his substantives. Here.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll begin my time in 3, 2, 1. Honorable panel, fellow debaters, good afternoon. Let me tell you a short story now. So I have these two dogs, and when they were puppies, I realized that the stronger one always picked on the weaker one, and I reprimand him for that. But he continues to do it when I'm not looking. And I'll draw back to this story at the end of the debate, but I want you to keep it in mind, right? Now, let me be very clear what we stand for. The opposition knows that C-190 is nothing but a paper battle waiting to happen. And even if the paper battle is won, it's a symbolic victory. Proposition believes the only true way to fix problems of violence we face in the workplace and in Jamaica on a whole is by increasing wages. Now, as first speaker, I'm going to point out why the proposition specific case doesn't work. I'm going to recontextualize this debate and outline how each side can win the debate and then push forward a few substantives with the time I have. My second speaker will rebut the team's case again and continue to push substantives. My last speaker will whip this debate into shape and prove that we've won. Now, firstly, a large part of this debate is understanding specific to Jamaica. In Jamaica, the predominant issue is not issues in the workplace, is not gender-based violence. You know, the examples you use are places where, you know, racism and gender-based violence might be prevalent in the workplace, but Jamaica, that is not the predominant issue. The predominant issue that we're having is that people want food, people want money, people want to be able to afford housing, people want to be able to afford safety. And if they can't afford safety, they seek safety elsewhere. And panel, that is
Point of information.
I'll accept your point of information.
If it is a case where all these challenges are not an issue in Jamaica, how do you explain the domestic workers who consistently experience sexual harassment in the workplace?
I didn't say it's not a problem. I said it's not the predominant issue, right? So yes, the workers, they might be experiencing it. And as a matter of fact, I believe it's about 40% of workers. Mind you, that's less than 50, but that is a large amount. And we're not saying gender-based violence is not important. We're saying it's not the predominant issue, but we're also going to offer a better way to solve it than you can offer. Now, what does status quo in Jamaica look like? Wage stagnation, inflation, rising cost of food, rent, transportation. Public sector unions constantly negotiating for increases just to keep up. Meanwhile, Jamaica already has domestic laws addressing sexual harassment and workplace misconduct. Though enforcement may not be perfect, the framework exists. So the debate is not, is workplace safety good? We all know that it is. The debate is, what should a trade union prioritize when resources are limited? And then the burden analysis is going to be simple for your panel. Proposition must prove that prioritizing C-190 over high wages produces greater overall benefit to workers in Jamaica's current context, and that delaying wage advocacy is justified. We win if we prove either one, wage prioritization produces greater immediate and structural benefits to workers, or two, C-190's benefits can still be achieved without sacrificing wage fights. And that right there is what we're pro to uphold. To be very clear, we acknowledge the importance and inherent value behind C-190, and don't misunderstand us. We're not saying workplace safety isn't important. We're saying C-190 is not the way around the problem, because the problem is not the lack of laws, but rather the lack of enforcement of these laws. So the only fixes are to either make sure that these laws are actually being enforced and enforced well, which you are clearly not doing with your policy, or to give workers a way to defend themselves. And economic empowerment is the weapon that allows workers to defend themselves from any sort of violence in the workplace and in the country on a whole. Now, let me move into my first substantive point. In Jamaica's economic reality, prioritizing high wages produces more immediate and widespread protection for workers than ratifying C-190. Now, money is not just simply a comfort. It is the power that they have. High wages determine whether workers can afford food, healthcare, school fees, transportation, and safe housing. Without economic stability, workers are more vulnerable to exploitation and harassment because they cannot afford to leave abusive environments. If unions channel their primary bargaining capital into C-190 ratification campaigns, this is lobbying government, public pressure, coalition building. That is time and leverage not used in wage negotiations. And we know that collective bargaining power is finite. In Jamaica, every day we hear cries for higher wages. We see strikes for more money. The people want to be financially free, and what will we give them to eat? Mr. Speaker, C190 Kianyam. And when we fail to prioritize wages, workers fall further behind in real time. And what do higher wages do? They reduce poverty, they increase worker mobility, and they strengthen bargaining positions long term. When workers are financially stable, they are less trapped in abusive workplaces. And now this links into the idea of the empowerment ladder. Now, on the bottom rung of the ladder, we have workers making enough money to barely survive. And that's where Jamaica is right now, right? They have nowhere to leave their job and go because they can't afford to. But when we go up to the next level now, persons make a livable wage and are able to have savings and so on and so forth, and they now are less likely to take slackness from their employers or their fellow employees. But furthermore, abuse doesn't stop at the gate of the workplace. Abuse follows them home. So they're less likely to take slackness from the abusive baby father. They're less likely to take slackness from the creep in the streets, right? But even more, if they get this win, the fight for C190 is going to be easier. And that brings us to when workers see physical manifestations of their union dues, they're more likely to support the fight for C190. For example, remember when the teachers strike for JTA and, they got their wage increase and they were happy and, that built faith in the JTA. And this is a point in and of itself. Prioritizing wages strengthens unions institutionally, making future safety reforms, including C190 implementation, more achievable. To sum it up, stronger unions equal more dues, equal more negotiating power, equal more political influence. Because when unions gain legitimacy and membership growth, then they deliver tangible economic wins. And then if instead unions prioritize a convention that depends heavily on state enforcement mechanisms, they risk diverting energy into a process largely controlled by the government bureaucracy rather than collective bargaining strength. In Jamaica, many labor rights issues stem not from the absence of law, but the weak enforcement. And that is why you guys lose this debate. By securing high wages first, unions increase their structural power. With that stronger base, they are in a better position to demand meaningful, enforceable workplace standards. And now back to my story, right, about my pups. If I fed the weaker pup and made him strong enough to hold his ground, then he wouldn't be picked on anymore. Because as animals, we don't respect rules, we respect power. And in this case, we should empower the weak puppy. Similarly, we should empower workers to defend themselves. And how do we empower them? Economic empowerment. And that is why you should vote for the winning side of the house, the real CC. Thank you.
We thank the first leader of the opposition for that very fine and substantive speech. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we enter first period of cross-examinations, where we'll see the proposition team fielding 3 questions to our opposition, who will have 45 seconds to respond, minded that prop has 15 seconds within which to ask their questions. Clarendon, whenever you're ready.
If harassment is about power and culture, why do you believe that pay alone will fix it?
Because, let's be honest, money is what runs the world. The people that have money are the people that, they control the means of production, they control how goods go around the country, and they quite literally control the policies that is being formed. And my second speaker has a perfect example, but C190 doesn't allow people to afford a legal avenue to persecute their sexually creepy bosses, employers, and fellow co-workers. So thank you for the question.
We have been advocating for high wages for many years. So exactly why is it not working to an extent where we are satisfied with the wages?
Okay, that's a wonderful question, right? And the problem why as you can see, right, you acknowledge it yourself that we've been fighting for it for a lot of years. And every year or so we get a little closer, we get a little more wages, and we get a little more and a little more and a little more, and we want to continue fighting for that little more and that little more and that little more so much until we can eventually get to where it's a livable standard, so people can have their savings, so people can leave these abusive environments and move to safer environments.
This one?
Oh, wait.
Are you comfortable with telling harassment victims to wait until their wages improve for however long it takes?
Well, actually, I would argue if you want to argue which one takes longer, I believe ratifying C-190 and ensuring it is properly enforced is going to take way longer. So do you actually want them to sit down and wait until the government passes this law, which doesn't ensure that they'll be, guaranteed safety, rather than actually fighting for something that we've seen happen before and something that we know is possible to happen? So I believe that we would win. Oh, I'm not in the camera properly. I believe that we win on the argument of time because the worker waits longer waiting for the government to actually pass a bill and so on, and they even lose faith and so on and so forth in the trade union.
So we thank the proposition team for these very three fine questions. And now we turn the questioning period over to the opposition team, that's Cornwall, who will field three questions to Clarendon College. Whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you so much. So we hear them talking a lot about, the Sexual Harassment Act and so on. But, we want to ask you, can you identify what is missing in the Sexual Harassment Act that C-190 covers so well that it's going to fix all the problems we have right now?
Okay, so C-190 provides one, international backing and more pressure towards the government to have it enforced properly. And two, the major factor is people fear losing their jobs. That's why they don't report. With our implementation strategy for C-190, we include anonymous report channels so that they can report their bosses very well without fearing that they will lose their jobs. And we will also implement contracts to protect these workers in cases that they report harassment so that they do not lose their jobs. These mechanisms are what C-190's implementation will come with.
Okay, thank you so much, Speaker. But, as a matter of fact, I thank you so much for saying that because in status quo with the Sexual Harassment Act, you can do exactly what you just said. So don't paint a picture that you're doing anything new because you can report people anonymously for sexual assault. The people can't afford lawyers to actually sue their employers for sexual assault.
Was there a question attached to that?
That's not a question.
Right, they're very right in pointing that out, Cornwall. You have to ask a question. So unless it's a follow-up question, you'd have to frame it as such.
Okay, sorry. I'll reframe it as a proper question. In status quo, people are able to anonymously report their employers and their co-workers. So you are not doing anything different. So can you tell me what exactly you are doing different? Because you didn't tell me what you were doing different.
Okay, so even though they are able to do that, it is a case where they are not aware. Additionally, I also stated in our policies that we will include contracts to protect people, especially for those in the informal sector who are mainly disproportionately affected by sexual harassment.
Okay, Speaker. So you say they're not aware and you say that you're putting contracts in place. But once again, you don't claim how they're going to be more aware or anything. So once again, how will they be made more aware of C-190, etc., etc.?
With C-190, they are made more aware because it is an international organization that first implemented it, meaning that there is more pressure upon our government to actually adopt principles or strongly enforce the principles that we currently have. Also, we will be making them aware through workshops, training, social media, as well as mass media.
And as my first speaker also stated in her speech, which is in her policy, ratifying C-190 will come with uninformed visits to workplace. Therefore, workers will be educated on their rights that they have along with the C-190 policy.
Okay, very well. And that was a very fine period of cross-examinations. Both teams fielded very spirited questions, and we got some very good responses to said questions. Now we move over to the second speakers on both sides, starting with Clarendon College, their second proposition speaker, who will deliver her substantives for 6 minutes, followed by Cornwall College, which will also deliver for another 6 minutes. Whenever you're ready, Clarendon.
Good morning. As a Deputy Prime Minister of the proposition, I strongly agree with the ratification of the C190 policy. Firstly, while the need for higher wages is a crucial issue, and given the increase in the cost of living, I'd like to emphasize the fact that violence, harassment, and ensuring peace within the workplace is an even greater concern, as the safety and well-being of workers cannot be overlooked. The opposition basically stated that there will be no way of knowing whether or not the C190 obligations are going to be upheld. But as my Prime Minister mentioned, unannounced inspections will be implemented to ensure compliance. Also, observation measures in industries where applicable will be implemented. And contracts will be given to workers after they have reported, in case their boss decide that, oh, they're going to lose their jobs. Contracts will be there to ensure those persons are protected. Which leads me to my first point. Violence and harassment in the workplace has severe and long-lasting effects on both workers and organizations. For individuals, workplace abuse can cause emotional, physical, and psychological harm, including depression, anxiety, loss of confidence, and even leads to symptoms like headaches and sleep disturbances. In turn, this has a ripple impact on organizations, leading to an increase in absenteeism, higher turnover, not accepted, higher turnover rate, and reputational damage, ultimately decreasing productivity. It also reinforces harmful norms and incurs significant economic costs, creating a toxic cycle that will be extremely hard for us to break from. As a result, organizations suffer financially, struggling to maintain profit margin and increase wage expectations. Hence, implementing the C190 policy would be very beneficial for both the growth of individuals and organizations, fostering a safer, more respectful work environment that promotes well-being and success. Notably, Australia supports the effectiveness of C190. It was adopted in 2019 and by June 2023 contributed to recognizing every worker's right to a workplace free from violence. The convention provided protection to a broad definition of violence and harassment, including physical, psychological, sexual, and gender-based, with Australia's laws, policies, and practices being already consistent with the C190 publication, covering areas like anti-discrimination, work health safety, and equality. Furthermore, Antigua, Barbuda, as well as Barbados, 2 countries in the Caribbean region to ratify the policy, have shown economic growth and improvement in various sectors. For instance, Barbados' real GDP increased by 4% in 2024. They have implemented laws and regulations to prohibit violence and harassment across all sectors. Key strategies include not accepted. Mandatory policies for reporting and investigating incidents, providing support for victims such as counseling, beef, or even consultation. Disciplinary actions for perpetrators and training for employers and employees in prevention. This promotes a culture of respect and dignity within the workplace. My second argument is that C190 enhances human development, creating an environment where people can thrive, grow, and reach their fullest potential, free from harassment and discrimination. It empowers individuals by giving the workers a voice, enabling them to report incidents without fear. It fosters inclusive workplaces, encouraging diversity and inclusion, and driving social progress. Additionally, the C190 strengthens communities by supporting family and community stability through workers' protection. Furthermore, this drives economic growth by contributing to sustainable development and creating a foundation for long-term prosperity. These factors highlight the significant impact that the C190 policy is expected to have in Jamaica. With the implementation of the C190, Jamaica's laws might be updated to establish mechanisms aligning with the convention to provide even stronger protection for workers and to foster a safer environment to boost productivity and economic growth. This will contribute to Jamaica achieving their Vision 2030 goals, particularly Goal 3. Jamaicans are empowered to achieve their fullest potential. By promoting a safe and respectful environment, C190 once again proves that it contributes to our human development. It also supports Goal 4. The society is secure, cohesive, and just. The convention influences social cohesion, reducing violence, and fostering a more harmonious society. It will ensure workers' rights are protected, promoting fairness and justice, extending respect beyond the workplace and influencing broader societal minds. Mr. Speaker, this shows that ratifying the C1 policy will be a major contributor to Jamaica's development and the beginning of creating a just, equal, and prosperous work life for all Jamaicans. Thank you.
We thank the second speaker for that very fine speech, further emphasizing the need of C190 as a precursor for the curbing of workplace violence, protecting all workers and ensuring that, they feel safe and secure, promoting also a better economy. But to counteract that, we welcome the second speaker of the opposition, Cornwall, with his substantive speech. You're here.
In my timing.
I'll begin my timing in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. There's a saying that is well known in Jamaica. Promising a man a castle doesn't give him a roof tonight. The proposition has listed a lot of problems with sexual harassment, with low confidence and depression, etc. But doesn't giving them more money fix these problems and more legal struggles? The proposition has come to this house today with a castle. They present ILO Convention 190, a beautiful, well-intentioned international document, and tell us that this is a savior of the Jamaican worker. International pressure is important, but we do not need international pressure to do anything. They tell us to ratify this paper. Violence stops, harassment ends, and dignity is restored. But Mr. Speaker, we are a trade union. We do not deal in wishes. We deal in the harsh realities of the factory floor, the hotel lobby, and the construction site. The reality is you cannot legislate dignity to a worker who cannot afford dinner. Again, you cannot legislate dignity to a worker who cannot afford dinner. Today, I will dismantle the government's fantasy that legal ratification equals protection. I will defend my partner's crucial point that poverty is the root of vulnerability. And finally, I will present to you the empowerment ladder previously mentioned by my opposition leader, proving that without financial power of high wages, rights are just expensive luxuries that the poor cannot access. Look at the government's case, Mr. Speaker. They argue that C119 is a moral imperative because it addresses violence directly. But Mr. Speaker, let's be real about Jamaican legal system. We already have the Sexual Harassment Act of 2021. We have laws against assault. Yet 96% of workers still report violence. But why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because law requires enforcement, and enforcement requires resources that state struggles to provide. If a domestic worker in St. Andrew is harassed by her employer, what exactly does C190 give her? Does it give her a legal avenue? Mr. Speaker, lawyers cost money. Time off to attend hearings costs money. If that worker is earning minimum wage of $16,000 a week, she cannot afford justice. She stays silent not because the law doesn't exist, but because she cannot afford to use it. The proposition offers her a shield she cannot live. We offer her a high wage that allows her to walk away. Financial independence is the only immediate protection against abuse. We have finite political capital, Mr. Speaker. We have limited time at the bargaining table. Every hour lobbying Parliament to ratify a treaty which has only been ratified by 50 countries globally because it is a bureaucratic nightmare is an hour we are not fighting for a living wage. In a accept.
So you basically you stated that the only way to help a lady, to help a woman who was sexually assaulted in the workplace is to give her money. Are you saying that monetary value will erase all the psychological suffering that she went through because of that harassment?
No, but it will empower her to leave that situation and do better for herself. As I continue, in a country where the cost of living for a family is $25,000 a week, but the minimum wage is $16,000, prioritizing a treaty over survival is not just a strategic error, it is a misdirection of duty. My partner, the first opposition, brought you a crucial argument. Wages break the cycle of violence beyond the workspace. The proposition tried to dismiss this as ignoring the victim, but they are wrong. We are the only side offering a way out. When a woman earns a living wage, let's say about $30,000 a week, she controls her own destiny. If her worker is abusive, if her partner is abusive at home, she has the financial means to rent her own space. If her boss is harassing her at work, she has the savings to quit and find a new job. Poverty is a trap, and low wages are the bars of that cage. When you keep wages low, you force victims to rely on their abusers for survival. The proposition wants you to put a no harassment sign on the cage. We want to unlock the door. High wages are not just about buying bread. They are about buying freedom. A trade union's first job is to ensure its members are free from the coercion of poverty. Now let me allow to provide my extension. The accessibility gap. Who actually does C190 benefit? It benefits the formal workers, the civil servants, the person in the air-conditioned office in New Kingston with an HR department. But Mr. Chair, 40% of Jamaican's economy is informal. The gardener, the household helper, the street vendor. C190 is a paper tiger in the informal sector. You cannot enforce complex harassment reporting structures on a small firm in St. Elizabeth. However, high wages are universal. When a trade union fights for a sector-wide living wage, it lifts the floor for everyone. When we advocate for higher wages, we create a market pressure that demands better pay even in informal sectors. If we prioritize C190, we are prioritizing the comfort of the white-collar worker while leaving behind the blue-collar worker. We create a two-tier system, those who have the rights on paper and those who are still too poor to eat. Furthermore, high wages are the engine of union power. When members see their paychecks go up, they join the union. More members equal more dues equal better legal funds to later fight for C190. If we chase a treaty today and lose wages tomorrow, we lose our membership. And weak union helps no one, Mr. Speaker. And the proposition offers you a we offer you the ability to say no to abuse and to walk away from harassment. We offer you the ability to feed your children without dependency, Mr. Speaker. Trade unions exist for one reason above all else. It exists for empowerment. We empower workers with the currency of freedom, literally and figuratively, for the dignity of the Jamaican worker, for the mother who needs to leave an abusive home, and for the future of this union's movement. I urge you to prioritize wages over words. I am proud to oppose.
And with that, we thank the second opposition speaker for that very spirited speech, reminding us that, in as much as the matters that will be brought forward by the C190 are important, people need money to act on these issues, to empower them, reminding us of things like Jamaica's workers in the informal sector who also need to be looked at, the blue-collar workers, and not just those who work within the office. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving into our second period of cross-examinations, where we'll see first the opposition team fielding 3 questions to proposition, questions with 15 seconds, and then, Clarendon having 45 seconds to respond. After which we'll see the proposition team, that's Clarendon, fielding 3 questions to our opposition team. Cornwall, whenever you're ready.
All right, Speaker. So Jamaica has not yet ratified C190 despite years of advocacy. So what materially changes today that makes ratification so much more probable than it ever was before?
Okay, so C190 was the first country to implemented it in 2019. That is relatively recent. However, we have been advocating for wages since the 1930s. There has been improvements in these wages over the years. However, it was often followed by inflation and economic crises, putting us back at square one. Every time we move up, we move back down because of inflation and other economic crises. With C190, when we implement it, the effect will be permanent.
Okay, so you point out that inflation is a large issue, right? So can you explain to me, is sexual harassment a larger issue than people not being able to afford food, and why or why not?
Okay, so it's not a case where C190 only addresses sexual harassment in the workplace. It addresses other forms of discrimination, discrimination based on sexual orientation, discrimination based on your race. And we see discrimination based on sexual orientation in Jamaica a lot because people are then denied opportunities in the workplace that will actually enable them to move further up the economic level, get promotions, get better wages.
Also, we aren't saying that one is more important than the other. What we are saying that it is the right of individuals to choose if a person can or cannot touch their bodies, and it also has a tremendous psychological effect on them. So therefore, it is just as important as them being able to afford food.
Furthermore, C190.
Okay, out of order.
All right, thank you so much, Speaker. And thank you for pointing out psychological impacts, because now I ask you the question. You listed a bunch of bad effects of, sexual assault, but doesn't giving them more money actually fix all your impacts and more, like being able to afford the legal battles and so on and so forth?
Okay, so first of all, money cannot fix everything that goes on to the people psychologically. Second of all, higher wages definitely takes way more time than C190 to implement. As I said before, it is like C190's foundation for getting higher wages in the future. We have been advocating, as I said, for higher wages since the 1930s. C190 came about in around 2019. However, we see effects of this in the 2020s in the 50 countries that have ratified the convention.
All right, we thank Cornwall for those very fine questions, and to Clarendon for also responding to those questions. Now the questioning will move over to the proposition team, who will field 3 questions back at their opposition. So Clarendon College, whenever you're ready for your 3 questions.
Without C190 type standards, how will you hold employers legally accountable for workplace harassment?
All right, thank you. Now, how will we hold employers legally accountable? When we give them money, they can afford to get a lawyer, and they can afford to sue the workplace, and they can afford to do everything. You know why? Because laws are already in place under the Sexual Harassment Act. You know what? You don't provide to us, you don't explain to us. How will people be able to afford a lawyer and $16,000 a week? How will people be able to afford to go to court over this matter? Won't the people who are richer be able to afford the better lawyers, and the rich employers are continuously going to be protected because they have money? You know why? Because money is power.
Okay. How do you account for the reduced collective bargaining due to a normalization of harassment in the workplace?
Could you repeat that question, please?
How do you account for the reduced collective bargaining due to harassment in the workplace?
I don't understand how that is our problem or how we're causing that, because in our world there's going to be less sexual harassment and there's going to be more collective bargaining because of the empowerment ladder. But well, if there's less collective bargaining, then you have to give people tangible things to work with. And when people see their wages increase, that's a tangible thing. And that increases collective bargaining. You know what doesn't increase collective bargaining? C190, because people don't know what C190 does and people don't think it's important. People want more money. People want to be able to eat.
So a question, based on what you were saying. So if I, for example, hit you in the face like 10 times and I give you $10,000 for each slap, are you saying that that's okay? You are basically stating, is that okay? That's okay. And I'm asking, is that okay in your viewpoint?
Well, Speaker, yes, that is okay. Do you know why that's okay? Because I'm going to take the $10,000 and I'm going to get a lawyer to sue you. That is what we're arguing. So by all means, slap me 10 times and give me $100,000, because I'm going to use $30,000 out of that to get a lawyer to sue you for even more money, Speaker. So thank you. I'll take all 10 slaps.
Okay, we thank both teams for that very entertaining period of cross-examinations. So now we'll enter a 1 minute grace period, and we'll see the third opposition speaker coming to deliver his substantives for 5 minutes, after which we will see the prop team with their third speaker with her substantives, right? So your 1 minute grace period begins now. All right, I've been informed by your timekeeper that your 1 minute grace period has elapsed. So we welcome the third lead of the third opposition speaker to begin whenever you're ready.
For timekeepers are beginning 3, 2, 1. No, Mr. Speaker, the impeding issue in Proposition's case is their lack of differentiation from the status quo. The problem we face in status quo is poor enforcement from the government of existing laws. And in the first round of cross-questioning, they agreed that the Sexual Harassment Act is synonymous with C-190. And they also agreed that Jamaica doesn't properly enforce these laws, yet they don't see why increasing wages is the more favorable option for success. The other point that is very crucial to this debate, Speaker, is that the reason people getting money is money fixes issues. They have to be recompensated for the rising economy that was brought up earlier in the debate. So we can't simply start giving people money due to the rising economy. Mr. Speaker, the debate was never about whether violence and harassment matter. They do. The reason in the House is why trade union in Jamaica must prioritize when resources, political capital, and bargaining power are limited. Government chose legal symbolism. We choose economic transformation. And when we weigh this debate on scope, magnitude, probability, and now cost-benefit analysis, opposition wins decisively. Who actually benefits from this, Mr. Speaker? Government prioritizes C-190, but even on their own frame, C-190 relies on ratification, legislative reform, administrative enforcement, reporting mechanisms, and cultural change. In a country where 40% of workers operate in the informal sector and enforcement is already weak, the scope of C-190 is immediately limited. By contrast, wage advocacy applies across sectors. It strengthens both formal and informal workers. It increases purchasing power economy-wide. It reduces vulnerability structurally. Wages touch every worker. C-190 touches only those who can successfully access and navigate enforcement structures. On scope alone, wages win. Depth of impact, Mr. Speaker. Government treats violence as the root problem. Poverty and economic dependency trap workers in abusive environments. A worker earning 16,000 Jamaican dollars per week cannot easily leave an abusive employer, leave an abusive home, afford legal action, or risk unemployment. Economic dependency is the cage. Higher wages provide exit options. They reduce the tolerance for abuse. They increase bargaining power. They strengthen unions long term. C-190 regulates behavior. Wages redistribute power. One pattern symptoms. Government must provide that the government must provide that prioritizing C-190 produces superior outcomes. But Jamaica has not ratified C-190 despite advocacy. Enforcement gaps already exist under current laws. Meanwhile, unions have demonstrably secured wage gains and restructuring agreements. So ask yourself, which is more probable in Jamaica today? A convention that requires state machinery and political approval, or collective bargaining and wage negotiations? And where do these resources go? Now, prioritizing C-190 extensive lobbying campaigns with uncertain ratification timelines, legal drafting, policy engagement, and risk of symbolic victory without material change. The benefits of C-190 are a strong normative framework, clear definitions of violence and harassment, potential long-term shift. Now compare that to wages, Mr. Speaker. We have immediate income increases, reduced poverty and economic stress, greater financial independence to leave abusive environments, stronger union membership, trust, and mobilization, increased customer spending that stimulates local demand. When we compare the return on investment, wage advocacy produces immediate, measurable, and economy-wide benefits. C-190 produces conditional, delayed, and enforcement-dependent outcomes. In a resource-constrained developing economy, rational actors provide policy with higher probability of tangible results. The government must prove that C-190 is more effective than wages, and that it is realistically enforceable in Jamaica, and that the prioritizing wages does not worsen poverty-driven vulnerability. They proved none. Instead, they give us moral urgency. But debates are not one on moral appeal. They are one on comparative impact and rational prioritization. Opposition does not ignore gender-based violence. We argue that the fastest, broadest, and more sustainable way to reduce vulnerability to violence is economic empowerment. You cannot litigate your way out of poverty, but you can wage bargain your way out of dependence. No. In elimination rounds, judges reward realism. And realism in Jamaica means low wages, high informality, limited enforcement, and finite union resources. Under those conditions, wages just are not important. They are foundational, and foundational priorities must come first. For this, the big picture government is world down top legal reform. Our world is bottom up worker empowerment. They are foundational for Jamaica's current system, and foundational priorities must come first. For those reasons, opposition wins this debate. Thank you very much.
We thank the third speaker on opposition for closing off this debate on side opposition, and welcome the final speaker on team proposition to close off this debate for the up team, and by extension, this debate. You're here.
All protocols observed. As third speaker of side proposition today, I will be cementing my team's arguments in order to prove why we have clearly won this debate. Mr. Speaker, throughout this debate, the opposition has set this up like it is all about monetary value. And I would like to rectify that the motion claims The motion claims that it will be advocating for higher wages, which does not ensure that wages will increase. Mr. Speaker, the opposition loves to tell stories. They have told us about a puppy. They have told us about a man promising another man a house. But let's take the story of the puppy into consideration. First off, you did not feed the puppy, therefore the puppy is weak. The trade unions have been advocating for higher wages since the 1930s without advocating for safer workplaces, which has caused the safer workplaces to be the little puppy and high wages to be the big puppy. Mr. Speaker, promising somebody a house is selling dreams. We are not selling dreams. We are selling what it is, because all persons are entitled to workplaces that are free of harassment. Mr. Speaker, while wage increases are necessary and important, at the moment, it is like putting a band-aid on a leaking wound. Does it stop the bleeding? Yes, but it does not address the root causes of the wound or the pain that comes with it. Our economy is wounded by everyday acts such as sexual harassment, racial discrimination, inequality, and many more, The band-aid that my opposition suggests is slapping these victims with money instead of addressing the root causes of these problems. Mr. Speaker, with the implementation of C190, all the suffering that persons endure will be addressed. And I would like to point something out. As my first speaker stated in her policy, C190 is here for all the marginalized groups, whether it be the formal sector, the informal sector, white-collar workers, blue-collar workers. It is for everybody. While all the opposition has been doing this monetary value. C190 is what the Jamaican economy needs to set the base in order to advocate for higher wages. Because Mr. Speaker, trade unions have been advocating for higher wages since the 1930s. And while I will say it has increased a little bit, Mr. Speaker, every time wages increase, inflation happens and prices fluctuate and persons are back at square one, and my opponents have failed to address this matter. All they talk about is money. Mr. Speaker, money can't buy everything. Money can't buy happiness. Money can't fix the psychological pain that a person will go through if they are harassed within the workplace. They need their concerns to be addressed. They need their concerns to be addressed by the persons that have done them the hurt. Mr. Speaker, my opponent conceded to the fact that he would let somebody hit him in the face 10 times for $10,000. Mr. Speaker, that does not make any sense. These concerns need to be addressed, and persons in the wrong need to be held accountable for their actions. As my first speaker stated, implementing C190 will break down the stigma and fear surrounding the reporting of workplace harassment. Many workers experience harassment on the job but remain silent because they fear losing their employment or income. This is especially true for workers in the gig and informal sectors, entry-level employees, and vulnerable cultural minorities. Moreover, when workers operate in environments where harassment, threats, and belittling and intimidation are normalized, they become even less likely to report abuse. According to a survey by the International Trade Union Confederation, in countries where C190 was implemented, unions raised awareness and negotiated workplace protections that helped dismantle the normalization of harassment and empowered workers to speak up and report misconduct. Mr. Speaker, my opponents are normalizing this by saying, yes, let them do it and then give the victims money. No, we address the cause that stopped them from doing it in the first place. And that is what trade unions for. I would also like to point that out. As trade unions, they are responsible for the protection of workers' safety, dignity, and rights. Violence and harassment in the workplace create deep and lasting harm. Victims often suffer emotional, physical, and psychological effects such as depression, anxiety, loss of confidence, and chronic stress. These are not minor inconveniences that you can fix with money. They are serious outcomes that affect workers' dignity, productivity, and overall quality of life. Moreover, the consequences extend beyond the individual organizations themselves.
Okay, speaker, I'm so sorry to cut you, but unfortunately your time has elapsed and the panel has put down their pens and papers. But we thank you, both teams, for those very fine speeches and substantive contributions to this debate on what we have learned about the moral justifications for things like C-119, advocating for better treatment of our workers both in the formal and informal sector, and also on our position for things talking about matters relating to wages and how that is an economic gain for society in terms of how we're better able to uplift and empower. So at the end of this debate, it was a matter of which one is better able to allow our citizenry to be more empowered to talk about the things that truly matter to us. But before we come with the rankings and the results, our panel, myself and the panel will step away for just a moment to do a brief deliberation, and then we'll come back to you with the results and the OA. All right.